They say after 40 years, you begin to truly understand the person you married. But for me, it was more like slowly discovering a stranger. 40 years. Imagine that. 4 decades alongside a man who kept his secrets close, always glancing at his watch, always on his way to the next flight. My husband, Jonas Frost, had been a pilot as long as I'd known him. A man perpetually in motion. And for most of those years, I was content to let him roam. I knew he loved me in his own quiet way. I accepted our silences, the whispers of his footsteps late at night, the creak of the door closing as he left for yet another trip. He was an adventurer. I was his constant. Our marriage had its own peculiar balance. Until the night he shattered it. It was over a quiet dinner, one of those rare evenings when he was home and the wine flowed and his gaze lingered on me a little too long. He leaned across the table, gave me a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and made his proposition. I remember the feeling of my pulse quickening. Half from disbelief, half from something darker, a thrill I hadn't felt in years. Think of it as an arrangement, he'd said, his voice low. They'll be here for you when I can't. 2 men. Ethan with his polished charm and Grant, his quiet intellect. They were his friends, he assured me, men he trusted. And he wanted me to trust them too. To welcome them into my life in ways I'd never imagined, to let them offer me a kind of companionship he could no longer provide. It was at first outrageous. A whispered joke that lingered in the air even after the wine was gone and the lights dimmed. But I couldn't forget it. Nor could I deny the twinge of curiosity that began to fester, the notion of rediscovering my own life in ways I'd given up long ago. Jonas was away so often, anyway. Perhaps this was his gift to me, or a test, or something else. That was the night a quiet curiosity transformed into something bolder. And though I didn't know it then, it was the beginning of an uncharted path that would unravel my marriage, my life, and everything I thought I understood. They say after 40 years, you begin to truly understand the person you married. But for me, it was more like slowly discovering a stranger. The man across from me, who I'd shared my life with for 40 years, reached for the bottle of wine between us, refilling my glass with a deliberate calm. His eyes met mine with an expression that seemed to convey a question, as if weighing a decision that he'd pondered alone for years. "Celia," he said, and there was something different in his tone, a softness I wasn't accustomed to. "There's something I've been thinking about, a way to make things easier for us." This was Jonas Frost, my husband, a man of few words and a life of many absences. A pilot for decades, Jonas had always been on the go, his life an endless series of schedules, flights, and faraway destinations. I'd grown used to our marriage being something of a waiting game. I was the constant, the one holding the fort while he was out in the world. It suited us both, or so I'd always thought. But on that particular evening, Jonas wore an intensity that stirred a sense of unease in me, a feeling I hadn't expected. "Go on," I said, curiosity masking the tremor in my voice. He leaned back, studying me as if assessing whether I could handle what he was about to say. "You know how much I'm away. I hate to think of you here alone so often," he started, his tone careful, almost too careful. "I was thinking maybe it's time you had someone else around, someone to look out for you when I can't." I frowned, his words not quite settling. "You're suggesting what exactly?" "A partnership of sorts. I have 2 friends who they could be here when I'm not," he said, giving me a cautious smile. "Think of it as an arrangement." The words took a moment to sink in. This was my husband's proposal, to share his own role in my life, to allow someone else into our carefully balanced world. He had spoken of his friends before, 2 men I'd never met, but whose names were vaguely familiar, Ethan and Grant. Ethan was some sort of art dealer, the type Jonas claimed could sell a painting to a blind man. Grant was a professor, serious and contemplative, or so Jonas had told me. I didn't know much beyond that, only that they were men he trusted, men who had known him long before I had. As he sat there, looking at me with a mixture of expectation and something else I couldn't place, a part of me wanted to laugh, to dismiss the suggestion as a strange joke. But I didn't. Instead, I felt an odd thrill unfurling, a dark curiosity I hadn't realized was within me. "You mean they'd be here for me?" I asked, my voice wavering between disbelief and intrigue. "Yes," he replied, leaning in, his voice dropping to a murmur. "They take care of you, Celia. I trust them. They're good men." "Is that what you want?" I asked, hardly recognizing the words as they left my lips. He took my hand across the table, his thumb brushing my knuckles. "I want you to be happy, Celia, and I know I haven't been around much to give you that." A sense of surrealism filled the air, as though I'd slipped into someone else's life. I'd been a social worker for most of my adult years, a woman who listened to others' troubles and offered advice. I'd always been steady, practical, the one who kept her feet on the ground. But here I was, listening to a proposition that sounded closer to a romance novel than real life. Still, beneath the shock, I felt something stirring. The idea of having new company, of indulging in attention I hadn't felt in years, was strangely intoxicating. Was this really Jonas's idea of love? Or perhaps, I wondered, was he giving me permission to discover parts of myself I'd long buried? There was only one way to find out. And so, I nodded. The next week came and went with a quiet tension, as though the house itself held its breath. I spent hours each day replaying that conversation, wondering if I'd dreamt it, if perhaps Jonas would return from his next trip and laugh it off. But he didn't. He was serious. That much was clear. And soon enough, I would meet Ethan and Grant. Ethan was the first to arrive. Jonas was away on a flight, of course, and I'd spent most of the day making the house look as inviting as possible. As the clock edged toward 7, the doorbell rang. My heart raced, hands trembling, as I opened the door to find a tall, broad-shouldered man standing on my porch, carrying a bouquet of lilies and a smile that felt like it was practiced in front of a mirror. "Ethan," I greeted, the name feeling strange on my tongue. "Celia," he replied, extending the flowers toward me. His voice was deep and smooth, his manner charismatic in a way that felt both comforting and disconcerting. We moved to the living room, where he settled himself on the couch as though he'd been there 100 times. He spoke with a natural charm, weaving stories about his work as an art dealer, slipping into tales of auctions in Paris and high-profile clients. He made me feel as though I were part of some larger, more exciting world, a world I'd only glimpsed in novels and movies. He laughed easily, his eyes crinkling at the corners, and before I knew it, I was laughing too. When he left that evening, he gave me a lingering look, his hand brushing mine. "I'll see you again, Celia," he said, his tone both a promise and an invitation. The following week, it was Grant's turn. Where Ethan had been bold and easygoing, Grant was quieter, his presence less overt, but somehow more intense. He was a man who listened, who leaned forward slightly as I spoke, his eyes thoughtful, as though every word I said held meaning. He wore glasses, the kind that hinted at a man who valued intellect, and his clothes were simple, unassuming. His smile, when it came, was small but genuine. We spoke about books, about life and love, and even touched on philosophy. He had a way of making me feel seen, of speaking with a gentleness that put me at ease. In his presence, I found myself revealing parts of myself I'd long hidden, old dreams, little regrets. He listened without judgment, nodding thoughtfully, as though absorbing each piece of me. When he finally rose to leave, he gave a small bow, a subtle gesture of respect that felt as intimate as a touch. "Thank you for a lovely evening, Celia," he said softly, his words lingering in the air long after he'd closed the door behind him. The following weeks passed in a quiet rhythm. Jonas was away more often, leaving the house to me, Ethan, and Grant. Each man brought a different energy to my life. Ethan was light-hearted, someone who could make the world feel brighter, He would appear with a grin and some new story, pulling me out of my routine, making me feel young again. Grant, on the other hand, offered a kind of steadiness, a quiet reassurance that left me grounded. His presence was a balm, a comforting antidote to Ethan's bright intensity. It was strange, I thought, how I had come to rely on these two men. I had always been a woman who valued independence, who took pride in the life I'd built, the home I'd kept. But now, for the first time in years, I felt a fullness, a sense of completion that had eluded me. Yet with that contentment came a new kind of restlessness. I wondered if Jonas knew what he'd set in motion, or if he'd merely acted on impulse, never truly expecting me to embrace his proposition. The thought made me both resentful and amused. After all, how could he have known that his arrangement would bring me a kind of freedom I hadn't dared to seek? And still, a part of me clung to the question that lingered beneath each of Ethan and Grant's visits. What truly did they want from me? But those questions could wait. For now, I would savor these moments, allowing myself to enjoy this new, unexpected chapter. Even as I felt something dark and unknown unfurling in the corners of my mind. Days blended into weeks as I grew accustomed to the alternating presences of Ethan and Grant, each filling a different space in my life. Jonas was away more than ever, his work stretching across continents and time zones, leaving me alone in our house for weeks at a time. I often wondered what he imagined back at home, or if he thought about it at all. One evening, as I prepared for Ethan's visit, I found myself standing in front of my closet, hands hovering over dresses I hadn't worn in years. It was absurd, I told myself, feeling the thrill of nervous anticipation. But the fact remained that Ethan was handsome and charming. He had a way of making me feel lighter, as if the world and all its complications were somehow manageable. That night, I settled on a navy dress, one that used to be a favorite in my younger days. When he arrived, I could see the approval in his eyes, the way he lingered on me a moment longer than usual. "Lovely as ever," he said, leaning in with a smirk. He always carried that playful edge, a flirtation I couldn't quite ignore. We spent the evening talking, sipping wine as he spun tales of his art dealings in Europe. Ethan had a knack for making everything sound grander, a kind of practiced charm that left me feeling like I was part of something more extraordinary than my quiet life. As he spoke, I felt my own curiosity heighten. What did he see in me? What kind of man took on this strange role that Jonas had devised? "Ethan," I began, setting down my glass, "why did you agree to this arrangement?" He looked at me, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "What's not to like, Celia? A beautiful woman, interesting company. I'd say I got the better end of the deal." "Is that all it is?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Jonas never told me what he offered you." Ethan's smile slipped just for a moment, a shadow passing over his face. "Jonas offered me friendship, Celia, and trust," he replied smoothly. "I don't take that lightly." His words should have reassured me, but instead, they only made me more uncertain. A flicker of something unspoken lingered in his gaze, something dark and unreadable. But before I could press him, he changed the subject, asking me about my own past, my years as a social worker, the life I'd lived before Jonas. And just like that, the moment passed, my questions swallowed in his effortless charm. A week later, it was Grant's turn to visit. In contrast to Ethan's bold energy, Grant brought a calm that was almost unsettling. He listened as though each word I said carried weight. A rare gift that left me feeling exposed in a way that was both unnerving and thrilling. That evening, as we sat across from each other in my small library, I noticed him studying the shelves, his gaze lingering on the rows of novels and history books I'd collected over the years. "You have a wonderful collection," he said, pulling a worn copy of a Russian novel from the shelf. "So many people have forgotten the classics." I smiled, grateful for his appreciation. "I suppose I like holding on to the past." He regarded me thoughtfully, setting the book down. Holding on to the past can be comforting, he replied. But it can also be a cage. There was a weight to his words, a subtle reflection that left me unsettled. It was moments like these when Grant's calm exterior seemed to mask something deeper, something unspoken. He was, after all, a professor, a man of quiet intellect, prone to philosophical musings. But there was an edge to him, a restrained intensity I hadn't yet understood. "Do you ever wonder, Celia," he asked suddenly, "what your life would have been like if you'd made different choices? If you hadn't married Jonas, for example?" The question took me off guard, stirring a feeling I couldn't quite place. "I suppose everyone wonders that," I replied carefully. "But we make the best of what we have, don't we?" He nodded, his gaze meeting mine with a softness that made me feel vulnerable. "It's just that you strike me as someone who has depths," he murmured. "I wonder if you've ever truly explored them." There it was again, that quiet challenge, the sense that he saw something in me even I didn't recognize. His words lingered long after he left, a haunting whisper in the corners of my mind. The weeks turned into months, and my interactions with Ethan and Grant became part of my routine, a strange new normal I hadn't anticipated. But there was an undercurrent, a growing sense of unease that gnawed at me. It was subtle at first, a glance that lingered too long, a conversation that hinted at secrets I wasn't privy to. One evening, while Jonas was away on another extended trip, I decided to organize his office. He'd always kept it meticulously tidy, but there were drawers he rarely touched, papers he left scattered across his desk. As I sifted through his belongings, I came across a small, locked drawer, one I'd never noticed before. My heart quickened as I found the spare key in his desk organizer, a sudden surge of curiosity propelling me forward. Inside, I found a letter, folded and worn, as though it had been read many times. The handwriting was unmistakably Jonas's, but the words were cryptic, vague, as if written in code. The letter referred to Ethan and Grant, mentioning them by name, along with terms I couldn't decipher. "The plan is set in motion," it read. "Our arrangement solidified. Trust is key. Do not fail me." A chill ran down my spine as I read those words, the reality of my husband's proposition taking on a new, unsettling dimension. This wasn't just a casual arrangement. There was something more at play, something that transcended the surface of companionship and veered into darker, hidden intentions. The words replayed in my mind that night, weaving themselves into my dreams, casting shadows across my thoughts. The next morning, as I prepared for Ethan's visit, I found myself regarding him with a new wariness, a question I didn't dare voice lingering between us. As the days passed, I found myself caught in a strange limbo, a place between trust and suspicion. Ethan and Grant continued their visits, each bringing their own unique charm, their own unspoken promises. But I could no longer ignore the dark glances, the subtle tension that simmered beneath their words. Ethan's charm had once been comforting, a distraction from my quiet life. But now I saw it for what it was, a mask, a carefully constructed facade that hid something sharper, more calculating. And Grant, with his quiet intensity, seemed less like a friend and more like an enigma, a man whose motives I could no longer read. I began to test the boundaries, dropping hints, probing for answers. I mentioned the letter once, casually in passing, gauging their reactions. Ethan laughed it off, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a glint of recognition perhaps, or fear. Grant's reaction was more subtle, a slight stiffening of his posture, a tension that told me he knew more than he let on. One evening, after a particularly intense conversation, I decided to confront Ethan directly. We were sitting in the living room, the fire casting shadows across his face, his eyes glittering in the dim light. "Ethan," I began carefully, "what do you really know about Jonas's arrangement?" He looked at me, his gaze steady but wary. For a moment, he seemed to consider denying it, brushing off my question as paranoia. But something in my expression must have convinced him otherwise, because he let out a sigh, setting down his glass with a quiet clink. "Celia," he said, his voice unusually soft. "Jonas. He's a complicated man. And this arrangement, it's not as simple as you think." "Then explain it to me," I demanded, my heart pounding in my chest. He hesitated, his gaze flickering to the door, as if checking to make sure we were alone. "Jonas and I, we go way back. He saved me once, years ago, pulled me out of a mess I couldn't handle alone. I owe him. And when he asked me to be here for you, to take care of you, I agreed. But there's more to it, Celia. Jonas, he's not as innocent as he seems." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked at me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Jonas has debts. A lot of them. He needed a way to secure his finances, and he thought you might be the answer." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, the truth unraveling before me in cold, hard clarity. I had been a pawn, a piece in some twisted game, my own life used as collateral for Jonas's debts. And Ethan and Grant, they had been his accomplices, his agents in this elaborate scheme. "How long have you known?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "Since the beginning," he admitted, his gaze dropping to the floor. "But it wasn't supposed to be like this, Celia. I didn't expect to care about you." The confession hung between us, a fragile, painful truth that neither of us could deny. I felt a surge of betrayal, of anger and despair, all mingling into a raw, unfiltered grief. The man I'd loved, the life I'd built, it had all been a lie, a carefully constructed illusion designed to keep me blind. I stood up, the room spinning around me, the weight of Ethan's confession pressing down on my chest. "I need you to leave," I whispered, my voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. He looked at me, his face etched with regret, but he didn't argue. He simply nodded, gathering his coat and walking out the door, leaving me alone with the shattered remnants of my life. The next morning dawned cold and gray, the chill seeping through the walls as I sat alone in the silent house. Ethan's confession weighed on me like a shroud, filling me with a mixture of anger and disbelief. My husband, Jonas, the man I had trusted for decades, had used our life as currency, turning me into an unwitting pawn in his financial games. But Ethan's parting words haunted me. "I didn't expect to care about you." It was almost laughable, the notion that in the middle of this scheme he could suddenly develop genuine feelings. Did he really think I'd believe that? Or worse, was it possible that I wanted to believe it? The thought filled me with disgust. Yet some part of me clung to the idea that perhaps, amid all this deception, there was at least a shred of something real. But that part of me was quickly silenced by a simmering fury that threatened to consume me. Today, it was Grant's turn. As I prepared for his visit, I felt a strange calm settle over me, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. If anyone could give me answers, it would be Grant, the steady, thoughtful professor who seemed to see everything. And if he'd betrayed me too, well, I was ready for whatever truth he had to offer. When the doorbell rang, I opened it with steady hands, letting him in without a word. He took in my expression, his own face impassive as he removed his coat, hanging it with practiced ease. "Celia," he greeted, his tone gentle, "you look troubled. Is something wrong?" "Sit," I replied curtly, gesturing to the couch. He raised an eyebrow but complied, settling into the seat across from me. I could see the flicker of unease in his gaze, a faint hint that he sensed what was coming. For a moment we sat in silence, the tension stretching between us. Then I met his gaze, letting my anger surface, giving him a glimpse of the storm brewing inside me. "Grant," I began, my voice calm but cold, "I want you to be honest with me, about everything." He shifted slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. "Honest about what, exactly?" "About Jonas," I replied. "About this arrangement and your role in it." His expression didn't change, but I saw his fingers clench, his composure faltering for just a moment. "What has Ethan told you?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Enough," I said sharply. He told me about Jonas's debts, about how this whole scheme was a way for Jonas to secure himself, using me as leverage. Grant's shoulders sagged, a look of resignation crossing his face. I suppose it was only a matter of time before you found out. So it's true? I pressed, anger boiling up inside me. You've both been in on this from the start? Yes, he admitted quietly, his gaze dropping to the floor. Jonas, he was desperate, Celia. He had debts he couldn't escape from, and he thought he could use this as a way out. And you went along with it? I asked, my voice shaking with betrayal. You, of all people. Grant, the wise professor, the man who listens and understands. He looked up, his eyes filled with a sorrow that felt almost genuine. I didn't want to, Celia. I told him from the beginning that it was wrong. But he's my oldest friend, and he made it sound like you'd be cared for, that it would be mutual. Mutual? I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and sharp. You think this has been mutual? You and Ethan have been here, playing roles, pretending to care. And for what? For some promise from Jonas? His face fell, guilt shadowing his features. It wasn't just a promise, Celia. It was a way for us to help him. And, well, after a while, it became more than that. More than that? I repeated, the bitterness in my voice evident. Don't try to convince me you had a change of heart, Grant. I'm not a fool. He sighed, his gaze softening. I know you're angry, Celia, and you have every right to be. But please, understand that my feelings, at least, were genuine. Genuine? I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. You call this genuine? But he didn't answer. Instead, he looked away, his jaw tightening, his silence speaking louder than any words. And in that silence, I felt full weight of my betrayal, the realization that the life I'd known was nothing more than a facade. I stood, my hands shaking, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I want you to leave, Grant. Now. He looked up, a flash of pain in his eyes. Celia, please, let me explain. But I shook my head, my voice a cold whisper. There's nothing left to explain. Just go. Without another word, he rose, retrieving his coat and heading to the door. But just before he left, he turned back, his gaze lingering on me with a sorrow that almost felt real. Celia, he said quietly, I'm sorry. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the empty silence of the house. The house felt different after that, quieter, emptier, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the weight of my anger, my betrayal. For days, I wandered through the rooms, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts, questions, and plans. I couldn't sit idly by, waiting for Jonas or his friends to dictate the rest of my life. No, this time, I would take control. I spent the next few days combing through Jonas's office, searching for anything that could give me an edge, a piece of leverage to turn the tables. And finally, I found it. A hidden file, tucked away in the back of his desk drawer, containing records of his debts, his investments, and letters from creditors demanding payment. There, among the documents, was a contract bearing my own forged signature, transferring a substantial portion of our assets into Jonas's sole control. A sickening realization settled over me. Jonas had planned this carefully, using me as his financial safety net. He'd betrayed me in every way possible, exploiting my trust, my loyalty, to secure his own future. But he'd made one mistake. He'd underestimated me. I spent the following days planning my next move, meeting with lawyers, securing my own finances, and preparing for the confrontation that was to come. I knew it wouldn't be easy, that Jonas would fight back, but I was ready. I would face him head-on, expose his lies, and take back control of my life. The night Jonas returned, I was waiting for him. He walked in, his usual casual confidence evident, but he stopped short when he saw me standing in the doorway, my face set, the documents clutched in my hand. Celia, he greeted, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. You're here. Yes, I replied, my voice steady. I think we need to talk. He frowned, glancing at the papers in my hand, his expression darkening. What's this? This, I said, holding up the file, is evidence of your betrayal, Jonas. The debts, the forged signatures, the arrangement with Ethan and Grant. His face paled, a flash of panic flickering in his eyes before he quickly masked it. Celia, you're overreacting. It's not what you think. Not what I think, I laughed, the sound bitter and cold. You used me, Jonas. You lied to me, manipulated me, all to secure your own future. You never cared about me. You just wanted my money. Celia, please, he said, stepping toward me, his hands outstretched. I was desperate. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. Save your excuses, I replied, stepping back. I trusted you, Jonas. I loved you. And this is how you repay me? He looked away, his jaw clenched, his expression one of barely concealed frustration. You don't understand, Celia, he said, his voice tight with impatience. It's not as simple as you think. Isn't it? I shot back, my voice hard. You forged my signature, Jonas. You pulled my name into your debts. You lied to me about this arrangement with Ethan and Grant, all so you could save yourself. How could any of that be complicated? He closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling through his nose, trying to regain control. I did what I had to do, he said finally. I didn't want you to find out like this, but yes, Celia, I needed a way out. And we both know that the life we had, it wasn't working. Not for either of us. I felt a pang of bitter incredulity. So you admit it? This was all a scheme to save yourself? You sacrificed everything we had, everything I believed in, for what? Money? Jonas's expression softened, and he stepped closer, his voice dropping to an almost pleading tone. Celia, listen. I didn't want to hurt you, but we haven't been happy for years. I thought that if I could fix things financially, it would be a way to start over, to make things right. To make things right? I let out a hollow laugh. So your idea of fixing our marriage was to manipulate me? To turn our life into a business transaction? His face hardened, the gentleness vanishing in an instant. Don't make it sound so petty. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Celia. I thought that if Ethan and Grant were there, you'd feel less alone. I thought you might even be grateful for the attention. Grateful? I repeated, my voice rising. You think I would be grateful for being betrayed by the man I loved? You wanted change, Celia, he said harshly, his voice rising. You think I didn't notice how restless you'd become? I offered you freedom, a way to live the life you wanted without the constraints of our old marriage. I thought you'd appreciate that. I stood there, staring at him, feeling my anger solidify into something colder, sharper. You thought I'd appreciate you selling off my life to pay for your mistakes? Jonas met my gaze with a steady, unyielding stare, the tension between us stretching taut as a wire. I thought we could start fresh, he said softly. But maybe I was wrong. No, Jonas, I replied, my voice like steel. You didn't think at all, or maybe you did. And that's what makes this so unforgivable. I could see the frustration building in him, his face darkening as he fought for control. And in that moment, I realized that Jonas wasn't just a man who'd made a mistake. He was someone who saw everything, everyone, as pieces in a game he believed he could control. And for years, I'd been his most obedient piece. Not anymore. As Jonas stormed off to his office, slamming the door behind him, I felt the hollow silence settle over me, the anger and betrayal churning within. But I couldn't afford to dwell on it. I had to focus, to keep my mind sharp. This wasn't over yet. Over the next few days, I barely saw Jonas, each of us existing in our own separate corners of the house, like two strangers who had nothing left to say. But I didn't mind. It gave me the time I needed to prepare. Ethan and Grant were both due to visit later that week, and I knew this would be my chance to get the answers I needed, to understand the full extent of their involvement. If they thought they could lie to me any longer, they were sorely mistaken. Ethan arrived first, his usual charm replaced by an almost hesitant caution. He entered the house as though expecting an ambush, his gaze flicking over my face, assessing the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. Celia, he greeted, his voice softer than usual. I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me. Sit down, Ethan, I replied curtly, motioning to the living room. We need to talk. He obeyed, lowering himself onto the couch, his posture tense as he waited for me to begin. I took a seat across from him, my gaze unwavering. Tell me everything, I said, my voice steady. No more half-truths, no more excuses. I want the full story. He hesitated, his fingers fidgeting as he avoided my gaze. Celia, I've already told you most of it. Jonas needed a way out, and he thought that if I was here for you, it would make things easier. Easier for who? I asked sharply. Because it certainly hasn't been easier for me. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what you want me to say. Yes, I agreed to help him, but I never meant for it to go this far. I leaned forward, my voice cold. Then why did you? Why go along with a scheme that was so clearly wrong? Ethan looked away, his face clouded with regret. Jonas was desperate, and, well, I owed him. There was a time when he helped me through my own mess, pulled me out of a bad situation. This was my way of repaying him. By lying to me? I demanded, my voice rising. By pretending to care, all for the sake of some debt? I do care, Celia, he replied quietly, his gaze finally meeting mine. I didn't expect to, but I do. You've become important to me, more than I ever thought possible. His words hung in the air, a fragile confession that felt like a hollow echo of what could have been. I wanted to believe him, wanted to let his words soothe the ache in my heart. But I couldn't forget the betrayal, the lies that had built the foundation of everything between us. You're saying that now, I said, my voice steady. But you've been lying to me from the beginning. How am I supposed to trust anything you say? Ethan looked away, a flash of pain crossing his face. I don't know. Maybe you can't. But I'm sorry, Celia, for everything. I held his gaze, the silence between us thick with the weight of unspoken truths. But before I could respond, the doorbell rang, cutting through the tension like a knife. Grant, I rose, leaving Ethan in the living room as I went to answer the door. Grant stood on the porch, his expression unreadable, his gaze meeting mine with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Come in, I said, stepping aside to let him enter. As he walked past me, I felt a strange sense of finality, as though the pieces of this puzzle were finally falling into place. I led him into the living room, where he froze, his gaze landing on Ethan. The tension between them was immediate, a charged silence that spoke volumes. Ethan looked away, his jaw tight, while Grant's face remained impassive, his gaze shifting to me. What's going on? He asked, his voice calm but wary. We're going to have a little talk, I replied, taking my seat again. The three of us. It's time for the truth to come out, don't you think? Grant's expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker of unease in his eyes, a sign that he understood the gravity of the situation. Celia, he began, his tone soft. I don't think. Stop, I interrupted, my voice firm. No more excuses, no more evasion. I want to know everything. Why you agreed to this arrangement, what you were promised, and what you really think of me. Grant hesitated, glancing at Ethan before finally meeting my gaze. I agreed because Jonas asked me to. He needed help, and I thought that maybe somehow it could work. That maybe you'd find happiness in this too. Happiness? I repeated, incredulous. Do you really believe that? That this was about my happiness? Grant looked away, his expression conflicted. I don't know what to believe anymore. But I do know that I came to care for you, Celia. Maybe not in the way Jonas planned, but it became real for me. I stared at him, my anger softening, replaced by a hollow sense of disappointment. It was the same story, the same hollow confession. Both of them had fallen into Jonas's scheme, each with their own excuses, their own versions of the truth. And in the end, I was the one left with the shattered pieces, the empty promises. Do you even understand what you've done? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. How you've broken every bit of trust I had? They both looked at me, their faces etched with regret, but it wasn't enough. Regret couldn't undo the damage, couldn't rebuild the trust that had been destroyed. I rose, my hands trembling as I clutched the back of the chair for support. "I want both of you to leave. Now." They hesitated, exchanging a glance, as though silently communicating, but they knew there was nothing left to say. Slowly, they rose, each of them heading to the door, without another word. I watched them go, my heart heavy, the silence in the house settling over me like a suffocating blanket. As the door closed behind them, I stood alone in the empty room, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like an anchor. My life, my marriage, my sense of security, it had all been torn apart, leaving me with nothing but questions and the bitter taste of regret. The next morning, the emptiness of the house felt almost overwhelming, the silence punctuated by the echo of their voices, the remnants of broken promises. But as I stood there, staring out the window at the gray sky, a strange sense of clarity began to settle over me. Jonas's betrayal, Ethan and Grant's lies, they had stripped away the illusions I'd held on to for so long. I had spent years living in the shadow of a marriage that was never truly mine, a life built on compromises and half-truths. But now, in the aftermath of the wreckage, I saw a path forward, a way to rebuild, to reclaim my own life. It wouldn't be easy, and I knew the pain would linger, but I was ready. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope, a spark of resilience that had been buried under layers of loyalty and obligation. I had been deceived, betrayed, but I wasn't defeated. I would rise from this, stronger, wiser, and free. I spent the next few days in a blur of activity, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. Each step was carefully calculated, every detail checked and double-checked. For too long I had been passive, a spectator in my own life, waiting for Jonas or his accomplices to define my path. But those days were over. One morning I drove into town and stopped by the small law office I'd discovered a few weeks earlier. I wanted a lawyer who wasn't part of Jonas's world, someone with no ties to him or his associates. After explaining my situation in brief, I left with a list of documents to gather and steps to take to ensure that my finances were secure and that Jonas would be cut off from any access to my remaining assets. I returned home and made my way into Jonas's office with a newfound sense of purpose. He wasn't due back for several more days, and I knew I had to act quickly. I searched through every drawer, every hidden compartment, combing through his files for any evidence that could give me leverage. And finally, after hours of searching, I found it. A second file with financial records and a series of dubious-looking transactions that suggested Jonas had been skimming funds from accounts I didn't even know we had. My heart pounded as I held the file in my hands, each document a piece of the puzzle that was Jonas's deception. This was my proof that he had betrayed me, not just emotionally but financially. I tucked the documents into my bag, feeling a rush of adrenaline that left me both exhilarated and terrified. For the first time, I had the upper hand. The next morning, I dialed Jonas's number, my fingers shaking slightly as I held the phone to my ear. He answered on the second ring, his voice smooth and casual, as though he were simply calling to check in on a routine day. "Celia," he greeted, a hint of surprise in his voice. "I wasn't expecting you to call." "We need to talk," I replied, my tone steady. He hesitated, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, assessing the reason behind my sudden call. "Of course, what's on your mind?" "I know everything, Jonas. The debts, the forged signatures, the arrangements with Ethan and Grant. I found the records, the hidden accounts. I know about all of it." There was a beat of silence, and then he let out a slow exhale. "Celia," he began, his voice soft, almost patronizing, "you're overreacting. It's not as bad as it seems." "Don't lie to me, Jonas," I said, my voice sharp. "I have the documents right here. You've been lying to me for years, and I'm done letting you control my life." "Celia, listen," he said, his voice shifting to a tone of forced calm. "I did what I had to do. We both know that the life we had wasn't working. I thought I was helping you. giving you a chance to live a more fulfilled life. A fulfilled life? I laughed, the sound bitter. You call this fulfilled? You used me, Jonas. You lied to me and manipulated me, all to pay for your mistakes. Fine, he replied, his voice hardening. Believe what you want. But you're not going to walk away from this unscathed, Celia. You're just as involved as I am. Those accounts are in your name too. And if you think you can just leave, you're fooling yourself. I felt a surge of anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. Don't underestimate me, Jonas. I have all the evidence I need, and if you think you can intimidate me, you're sorely mistaken. He fell silent, and I could sense the tension on the other end of the line. Finally, he spoke, his tone cold. You're making a mistake, Celia. You're going to regret this. Goodbye, Jonas, I said, ending the call before he could respond. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of relief, as though a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I was free. With Jonas's threats fresh in my mind, I knew I had to act quickly. I spent the next few days transferring my assets to a new account, one that Jonas couldn't touch. I changed the locks on the house, hired a security system, and made sure that everything I owned was secure. I also reached out to the lawyer I'd met with earlier, explaining the situation in more detail and sharing the documents I'd found. He assured me that I had a solid case, that Jonas's actions were grounds for legal separation and even charges if I chose to pursue them. But I didn't want a drawn-out legal battle. I wanted my freedom, my independence, and I wanted Jonas out of my life for good. So instead, I chose a simpler route. A formal separation agreement, one that would sever our financial ties and ensure that he could no longer access my assets. I knew it wouldn't be easy, that Jonas would fight me every step of the way. But I was ready. For the first time in years, I felt strong, capable, and unafraid. A week later, Jonas returned home, his expression dark as he entered the house. He looked around, taking in the new locks, the changes I'd made, his gaze hardening as he realized that I had taken control. Celia, he greeted, his tone cold. What is this? This, I replied, holding up the separation agreement, is the end of whatever was left of our marriage. He scoffed, crossing his arms as he regarded me with disdain. You really think you can just walk away? Yes, I replied calmly, setting the papers on the table between us. I'm done, Jonas. I've signed everything. All you need to do is add your signature, and we can finally go our separate ways. He glanced at the papers, a sneer twisting his lips. And what makes you think I'll sign this? Because if you don't, I said, my voice steady, I'll take the documents I found to the authorities. I'll expose everything you've done, and I won't hesitate to let them take it from there. For a moment, he simply stared at me, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. But slowly, realization dawned in his eyes, and I saw the fight leave him, his shoulders slumping as he let out a defeated sigh. Fine, he said, reaching for the pen. If this is what you want. He signed the papers, his signature scrawled across the bottom of the page with a bitterness that matched his tone. When he finished, he set the pen down, looking up at me with a cold glare. Congratulations, Celia, he said. You've won. I took the papers, my heart pounding as I felt the finality of it, the weight of our marriage dissolving into nothing more than ink on a page. But I felt no regret, no sadness, only a sense of liberation, a newfound freedom that filled me with a quiet strength. Goodbye, Jonas, I said, my voice steady. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the empty house. In the weeks that followed, I slowly rebuilt my life, piece by piece. I sold the house, moved to a small apartment in a nearby town, and began to rediscover the parts of myself I had long forgotten. I took up old hobbies, reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, and embraced a newfound sense of independence. I heard little from Jonas after the separation. He sent a few bitter emails, filled with accusations and insults, but I ignored them, letting his words fade into the background noise of my new life. Ethan and Grant, too, remained distant, their roles in my life fading into memory. I thought of them sometimes, wondering if their confessions had been genuine or simply another part of Jonas's manipulation. But in the end, it didn't matter. I was free from all of them, free to live my life on my own terms. One day, as I sat in my new apartment, sipping coffee and watching the sunlight filter through the window, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known in years. I was alone, but I was whole, complete in a way I hadn't been before. I had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and deception, but I had come out stronger, wiser, and more resilient. I was finally free. It wasn't until I caught Dane staring through the bedroom window that I realized I'd forgotten to close the curtains. And the worst part? I was wearing the most revealing lingerie I'd ever owned. The moment froze in time. I stood in front of the mirror, still holding the delicate strap of the sheer black chemise I'd been adjusting, my face burning as I registered his shocked expression. He was walking across the backyard, casually heading to the garage, when his gaze happened to glance upward. I don't know what caught his attention, the movement, the lighting, or just dumb luck, but his eyes locked on mine through the glass. For a split second, neither of us moved. His expression was a mix of surprise and something else, something I couldn't name but made my stomach twist in a way I hadn't felt in years. Then, as quickly as it happened, he turned and walked away, his stride a little faster than before. I yanked the curtains closed with trembling hands, my heart pounding. What have I done? I whispered to myself, staring at the now-covered window as though it could erase what he'd seen. The lingerie was part of an impulsive purchase I'd made during one of Peter's long business trips. I hadn't even taken the tags off yet. It was a silly indulgence, one I'd justified as a way to feel a little more confident, a little more alive. But now it felt like a glaring mistake. I tried to laugh it off. He probably didn't even notice the details, I told myself. It was just a passing glance, nothing more. But the heat in my cheeks and the flutter in my chest said otherwise. Later that evening, I stayed busy in the kitchen, desperate to push the incident from my mind. Peter was out of town as usual, and Dane hadn't come home yet. The house felt too quiet, the kind of silence that lets your thoughts grow louder than they should. When Dane finally walked through the door, I stiffened. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking to me before he gave a casual nod. "Hey, Isabel." "Hi," I replied, keeping my voice light, though my hands gripped the edge of the counter. He dropped his bag by the door and headed for the fridge. The air between us felt different, heavier, though neither of us acknowledged it. As he poured a glass of water, he glanced at me again, his expression unreadable. Finally, he broke the silence. "About earlier." I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. "What about earlier?" I asked, though I already knew. "I didn't mean to, see anything," he said quickly, his tone awkward but not apologetic. "I just happened to look up and—" My face flushed again, and I waved him off, forcing a laugh. "It's fine, let's just forget it happened." He nodded, but his eyes lingered a second too long before he turned and headed upstairs. As I stood there in the kitchen, my pulse still racing, I knew one thing for certain. Forgetting wasn't going to be as easy as I'd hoped. I spent the next morning trying to shake off the tension from the night before. It wasn't like Dane and I had spoken about anything inappropriate. It wasn't like anything had happened. Yet, there was an undeniable shift in the air between us. The thought plagued me as I went about my chores. I kept replaying the way his gaze had lingered just a fraction longer than it should have. How his words, though awkward, had carried a subtle charge I couldn't ignore. Dane had moved back in with us after finishing college 6 months ago. It was meant to be temporary, just until he found a stable job and got on his feet. I hadn't minded at first. He was polite, easygoing, and helped out around the house without complaint, which was more than I could say for his father. Peter was rarely home these days. Between his real estate deals and weekend golf trips, he spent more time away than with us. When he was home, his presence was more like a passing shadow. a few polite words exchanged over breakfast, a pat on my shoulder as he left for the day. I'd grown used to it, to the emotional distance that had become the norm in our marriage. But Dane's presence in the house was different. He brought life into the quiet spaces, a warmth that had been missing for years. I hadn't realized how much I appreciated it until now, when that warmth had started to feel like a spark. Around mid-morning, as I was folding laundry in the guest bedroom, Dane poked his head in. "Hey, need a hand?" he asked casually. I glanced up, startled, then shook my head. "No, I've got it. Thanks, though." He leaned against the doorframe, his tall frame filling the narrow space. "You sure?" "I don't mind." "I'm sure," I said, folding a towel and placing it neatly in the basket. He didn't leave. Instead, he watched me for a moment, a small, unreadable smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Isabel," he said after a pause, his tone lighter now. "About yesterday." "Dane," I interrupted, keeping my voice firm but kind. "There's no need to talk about it. It was just an accident. Let's move on." "I know," he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "But, can I just say something?" I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the edge of the basket. "All right," I said cautiously. His smile faded, replaced by a sincerity that made my heart skip. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I respect you, and I would never, cross a line." His words caught me off guard. "Thank you, Dane. I appreciate that." "But," he continued, his eyes meeting mine, "if I'm being honest, it wasn't something I could just forget." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I felt my cheeks flush, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. "Dane, I'm your stepmother," I said quietly. "You understand why this can't?" "Of course I do," he said quickly, cutting me off. "I'm just saying, you don't have to pretend it didn't happen. Not with me." There was something disarming about his honesty, the way he didn't shy away from the awkward truth. I nodded, turning back to the laundry. "All right, thank you for saying that." He lingered for another moment before finally leaving, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Over the next few days, I found myself hyper-aware of Dane's presence. Every time he entered the room, my pulse quickened. Every casual conversation felt like it carried a double meaning, even when it didn't. I told myself I was imagining things, that the incident by the window hadn't changed anything. But deep down, I knew better. One evening, while I was preparing dinner, Dane came into the kitchen. He opened the fridge, grabbed a soda, and leaned against the counter, watching me as I chopped vegetables. "What's for dinner?" he asked, his tone light. "Stir-fry," I replied, keeping my focus on the cutting board. "Smells good," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "You're a great cook, you know." "Thank you," I said, glancing up briefly. There was a pause, then he said, "You ever think about doing something just for yourself?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," he said, shrugging. "You spend all this time taking care of the house, of my dad. Do you ever do something just because you want to?" I frowned, setting down the knife. "I don't really think about it like that." "Maybe you should," he said, his tone softer now. Before I could respond, the sound of Peter's car pulling into the driveway broke the moment. Dane straightened, giving me a small smile before leaving the kitchen. Peter came in, greeted me with a distracted kiss on the cheek, and headed straight to his office. I watched him go, a familiar ache settling in my chest. Later that night, as I lay in bed, Dane's words replayed in my mind. "Do you ever do something just because you want to?" The truth was, I couldn't remember the last time I had. The following morning, I found myself in front of the same bedroom mirror, holding up the black camise I'd stuffed into the back of my drawer after the incident. For some reason, I couldn't bring myself to put it away again. Instead, I slipped it on, adjusting the straps as I studied my reflection. It had been years since I'd felt beautiful. Not just presentable, but truly, undeniably beautiful. And now, as I stood there, I saw a version of myself I'd almost forgotten, a woman who still had life in her, who wasn't defined by her role as a wife or a stepmother. A knock at the door startled me, and I quickly grabbed a robe, wrapping it around myself. "Come in," I called, my voice steadier than I felt. Dane opened the door, his expression unreadable. "Sorry to bother you," he said. "I just wanted to see if you needed help with anything today." I shook my head. "No, I'm fine, thank you." He hesitated, his eyes flicking to the edge of the robe where a hint of black lace peeked through. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes sent a shiver down my spine. "All right," he said finally, stepping back. "Let me know if you change your mind." As he closed the door, I sat down on the edge of the bed, my heart racing. Something was shifting between us, and I didn't know how to stop it. The tension in the house was palpable, an invisible thread pulled taut between us. I tried to go about my days as usual, cleaning, cooking, managing the small details of running a household. But it was impossible to ignore the way Dane's presence seemed to fill every corner of the space. It wasn't just me. He was different, too. He lingered longer in the kitchen when I was making coffee. He started sitting on the edge of the couch when I watched my favorite old movies, feigning interest in films he clearly didn't care about. And when we talked, there was something unspoken in his tone, a challenge, a curiosity, an unguarded honesty that was as thrilling as it was terrifying. I told myself it was harmless, but even I didn't believe that anymore. The breaking point came on a warm evening in early summer. Peter was out of town again, this time for a 3-day conference in Chicago. Dane and I were alone in the house, the weight of it pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. The power went out just after dinner, plunging the house into darkness. "Great," I muttered, fumbling in a drawer for the flashlight. "This is just what I needed." "Hold on," Dane said behind me, the sound of his footsteps steady and calm. "I've got candles in my room." A few minutes later, the living room was illuminated by the soft glow of several candles. It felt strangely intimate, the flickering light dancing across the walls. I sat on the couch, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened when Dane sat beside me, closer than he needed to. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm fine," I replied, though my voice betrayed me with a slight tremor. He leaned back, stretching one arm across the back of the couch. "You don't seem fine." I glanced at him, trying to keep my expression neutral. "It's just a power outage, Dane. I'll survive." "That's not what I meant," he said, his gaze steady. "You've seemed different lately." I felt my throat tighten. "Different how?" He shrugged, his eyes never leaving mine. "I don't know, like you're carrying something you don't want to share." I looked away, focusing on the candlelight instead of the intensity in his expression. "Everyone has things they keep to themselves." "Not everyone," he said softly. There it was again, that honesty, that disarming way he had of cutting through my defenses. I felt the words bubbling up before I could stop them. "What do you want me to say, Dane? That I'm lonely? That your father and I haven't really been a couple in years? That I don't even know who I am anymore outside of this house?" The words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. I immediately regretted them, but Dane didn't flinch. "I want you to say whatever's real," he said, his voice steady. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You don't understand. You're too young to—" "To what?" he interrupted, his tone sharper now. "To know what it feels like to be stuck? To want something you can't have?" I froze, my breath catching in my throat. He leaned closer, the space between us shrinking until I could feel the warmth of him, the sheer presence of him. "Dane," I began, my voice trembling. "I'm not a kid," he said firmly, his eyes searching mine. "I'm not blind either. I see you, Isabel. I see the way you try to hold it all together, the way you pretend everything's fine when it's not." "You don't know what you're talking about," I said, standing abruptly and moving toward the window. "Don't I?" he asked, his voice following me. "Why won't you just admit it? Admit that you're tired of pretending." I turned to face him, my hands trembling at my sides. "Because it's wrong, Dane. Whatever this is, whatever you think this is, it's wrong." He stood then, crossing the room in a few long strides until he was standing in front of me. "It doesn't feel wrong," he said quietly. My breath hitched. The words were so simple, so earnest, and they hit me harder than any argument could have. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, I said, "It doesn't matter how it feels." "It matters to me," he replied, his voice barely more than a whisper. The air between us was electric, charged with something I couldn't name but couldn't ignore. And then, before I could second-guess it, his hand reached up, brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice low and steady. I should have. I knew I should have. But the words wouldn't come. The next morning, the sunlight streaming through the windows felt harsh, unforgiving. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the night before in my mind. I'd crossed a line I could never uncross, and yet, the guilt I expected to feel didn't come. Instead, there was something else, a strange, quiet exhilaration, like a secret I couldn't help but savor. When I finally emerged from my room, Dane was in the kitchen, frying eggs. He looked up when I entered, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he said casually, as though nothing had changed. "Morning," I replied, my voice soft. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sounds of the sizzling pan and the chirping birds outside filled the silence. "Isabel," he said finally, his tone serious. I looked at him, my heart pounding. "Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. I nodded. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. He smiled then, a small, reassuring smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "We'll figure it out." I wanted to believe him. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Over the next few days, we fell into an unspoken rhythm. We didn't talk about what had happened, but it was there, lingering beneath the surface of every interaction. A shared secret, a silent understanding that neither of us could deny. But the house didn't feel like ours alone anymore. The ghost of Peter's presence hung heavy in the air, a reminder of everything we were risking. One afternoon, as I was watering the plants in the garden, Dane came up behind me. "Isabel," he said softly. I turned, startled, and nearly dropped the watering can. "What is it?" He hesitated, his hands in his pockets. "I don't want you to regret this." I stared at him, my heart aching at the vulnerability in his voice. "I don't," I said firmly. "But you're scared," he said. It wasn't a question. "Of course I'm scared," I admitted. Whatever this is, it's complicated." "We'll figure it out," he said again, stepping closer. "Together." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could navigate the impossible maze we'd created for ourselves. But as I looked at him, at the determination in his eyes, I couldn't help but wonder how long we could keep the rest of the world at bay. And how much longer I could keep pretending that this wasn't destined to fall apart. For the first time in years, I felt alive. It was reckless and irrational, but it was as if some long-dormant part of me had been awakened, refusing to be ignored. Every stolen glance, every casual touch that lingered just a second too long, sent my heart racing. Dane's presence filled the quiet spaces of the house, and it was impossible to ignore how much I had started to crave it. But the thrill of our connection came with a cost. Guilt loomed over me like a shadow, and no matter how much I tried to push it aside, it was always there, whispering in the back of my mind. It happened one lazy afternoon. I'd decided to clear out some of the clutter in the garage, a task I'd been putting off for months. The summer heat made the air thick and stifling, and sweat beaded on my forehead as I sorted through old boxes. Dane appeared in the doorway, a bottle of water in his hand. "Need some help?" he asked, his smile easy, as if this was just another ordinary day. "I won't say no," I replied, grateful for the company. He set the bottle down and started moving boxes to the side, his movements efficient and effortless. The silence between us was comfortable at first, but as the minutes ticked by, the air grew heavier, charged with something unspoken. At one point, I bent down to lift a box, and Dane's hand brushed mine as he reached for it at the same time. The contact was brief but electric, and I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Sorry," he murmured, but he didn't pull away immediately. I straightened, stepping back to put some distance between us. "It's fine," I said, though my voice trembled slightly. "Isabel," he began, his tone serious. I shook my head, cutting him off. "Dane, we can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "Pretending there's nothing between us?" I looked away, my heart pounding. "This isn't right, you know that." "Maybe it's not," he said, stepping closer, "but it doesn't change how I feel." I turned to face him, my resolve crumbling under the weight of his gaze. "Dane, it's dangerous." "For who?" he challenged, his voice steady. "Your husband who's never here? The neighbors who don't even look twice at us?" "For us," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. He reached out, his fingers brushing against my arm. "I'm not afraid of this, Isabel, are you?" The next few weeks were a whirlwind of stolen moments and whispered confessions. Dane and I danced on the edge of a knife, our connection growing deeper with every passing day. But the closer we became, the more dangerous it felt. Peter began calling more often, his voice laced with suspicion. "Everything all right at home?" he asked one evening as I stood by the window, phone pressed to my ear. Of course, I replied, forcing a lightness into my tone. Why wouldn't it be? You just seem distracted lately, he said, his words sending a chill down my spine. Is Dane giving you any trouble? No, I said quickly. He's been a big help, actually. Peter paused, and for a moment, I was sure he was going to say something else. But then he simply muttered, "Good," and ended the call. It was around this time that Georgia, my oldest friend, announced she'd be visiting for a few days. It's been too long, she said on the phone, her voice warm and familiar. I miss you, Izzy. I couldn't say no, though the timing couldn't have been worse. When Georgia arrived, she brought her usual energy and sharp intuition. She was the kind of person who could read a room in an instant, and it didn't take long for her to pick up on the tension between Dane and me. One evening, as we sat on the back porch sipping wine, Georgia turned to me, her eyes narrowing. All right, spill, she said, her tone playful but insistent. I laughed nervously. Spill what? Something's going on, she said, gesturing toward the house. You've been jumpy ever since I got here, and every time Dane walks into the room, you tense up like a spring. You're imagining things, I said, taking a sip of wine to avoid her gaze. Am I? She asked, her voice softer now. Izzy, you know you can tell me anything, right? Her words made my stomach churn. Georgia had been my confidant for years, but this was something I couldn't share. I'm fine, I said finally, forcing a smile. Really? She didn't look convinced, but she let the subject drop, for now. The night before Georgia was set to leave, she went to bed early, exhausted from the long day. Dane and I were alone in the living room, the silence between us heavy with everything we couldn't say. Are you okay? He asked, his voice low. I don't know, I admitted, my hands trembling slightly as I held the book I wasn't really reading. He moved closer, sitting on the edge of the coffee table in front of me. You don't have to keep doing this, he said softly. Pretending everything's fine. I don't have a choice, I said, my voice breaking. You always have a choice, he replied, his eyes searching mine. The weight of his words hit me like a tidal wave, and before I could stop myself, I reached out, my fingers brushing against his. In that moment, the rest of the world fell away. It was bound to happen eventually. No matter how careful we were, no matter how much we tried to hide, the truth had a way of creeping to the surface. It started with Georgia. She didn't say anything directly, but I caught her watching us more closely, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. Then there was Peter. When he returned from his trip, his demeanor was different. Colder, more calculating. I could feel the weight of his suspicion in every glance, every clipped word. One evening, as I stood in the kitchen preparing dinner, he walked in, his footsteps deliberate. Isabel, he said, his voice calm but firm. Yes, I asked, turning to face him. I've been thinking, he began, his eyes narrowing. Maybe it's time Dane found a place of his own. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Why would you say that? I asked, my voice trembling. He shrugged. He's a grown man. It's not healthy for him to stay here forever. I nodded slowly, my mind racing. I'll talk to him, I said, though the thought filled me with dread. Peter's gaze lingered on me for a moment before he left the room, and I knew. He was onto us. That night, Dane and I sat on the back porch, the darkness wrapping around us like a cocoon. He wants me to leave, Dane said, his voice tight with frustration. I know, I replied, my heart aching. What are we going to do? He asked, his eyes searching mine. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the walls were closing in, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The days that followed were a blur of whispered conversations and stolen moments, each one tinged with the fear of discovery. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to walk away. I had crossed a line I could never uncross, and no matter how much I tried to pretend otherwise, I wasn't ready to let go. It was a Thursday afternoon when the dam finally broke. I hadn't seen it coming, though in hindsight, maybe I should have. Secrets have a way of seeping into the cracks of a household, no matter how carefully you try to keep them contained. Peter came home early, hours earlier than I expected, and for once, he didn't call to let me know. I was in the living room, sorting through old photo albums, trying to distract myself from the growing tension in the house. The sound of the front door opening startled me. Peter? I called out, rising to my feet. He walked in, his face unreadable as he set his briefcase down by the door. Isabel, he said, his tone unnervingly calm. You're home early, I said, forcing a smile. I needed to talk to you, he replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. Where's Dane? The question caught me off guard. He's out, I said, though my voice wavered. Peter nodded, his gaze sharp as he stepped closer. Good, that makes this easier. Easier? I repeated, my stomach twisting with unease. He sat down on the edge of the couch, his movements deliberate. Isabel, I've been noticing things lately. Things that don't add up. My hands clenched at my sides. What are you talking about? The way you look at him, he said bluntly, his tone cold. The way he looks at you. Do you think I haven't noticed? My breath caught in my throat. Peter, you're imagining things, I said quickly. There's nothing. Don't lie to me, he interrupted, his voice rising. I'm not an idiot, Isabel. I've been watching. I've heard the whispers, the way you two go quiet when I walk into a room. I felt the blood drain from my face. It's not what you think, I said, though the words sounded hollow even to me. He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. Not what I think? Do you even realize what you're risking? My son, Isabel, my own son. Peter, please, I began, but he cut me off again. Do you love him? He demanded, his voice sharp and biting. The question hit me like a slap, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. Answer me, he said, his tone colder now. I don't know, I whispered, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. Peter's expression hardened, and for a moment I thought he might lash out. But instead he leaned back, exhaling sharply. I should have seen this coming, he said bitterly. I should have known you'd betray me. I didn't mean for this to happen, I said, my voice trembling. That doesn't make it any better, he replied, his tone dripping with contempt. Later that evening, after Peter locked himself in his office, Dane came home. I met him in the hallway, pulling him into the kitchen before he could go upstairs. What's going on? He asked, his brow furrowing as he looked at me. Peter knows, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Dane's eyes widened. What did he say? He confronted me, I replied, my hands trembling. He knows something's been going on between us. Dane cursed under his breath, running a hand through his hair. What are we going to do? I don't know, I admitted. He didn't say what he's going to do, but he's furious. I've never seen him like this. Dane's jaw tightened, his expression hardening. I won't let him hurt you, he said firmly. It's not me I'm worried about, I said, my voice breaking. He's going to want you out of this house. Then maybe it's time I leave, Dane said, though his tone was reluctant. No, I said quickly, shaking my head. That's exactly what he wants. If you leave now, it'll only make things worse. Isabel, he began, but I cut him off. We need to stay calm, I said, my voice steadier now. If we act like we've done something wrong, he'll use it against us. The next morning, Peter emerged from his office looking grim but composed. Over breakfast, he addressed me and Dane with an air of forced civility. I've been thinking, he began, his tone clipped. It's time we made some changes around here. What kind of changes? I asked, though I already knew. Dane needs to move out, Peter said bluntly. It's time he stood on his own 2 feet. Dane's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice calm. I've been helping out around the house. Why now? Because it's what's best for everyone, Peter replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. I opened my mouth to protest, but Peter silenced me with a look. Don't argue with me, Isabel, he said, his voice low. This is non-negotiable. That evening, Peter pulled me aside while Dane was upstairs. I could destroy you, you know, he said coldly. I stared at him, my heart pounding. What are you talking about? If word of this gets out, he continued, his tone calm but dangerous, it won't just ruin this family. It'll ruin you, your reputation, your friendships, everything. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. Why are you doing this? Because I've worked too hard to let you and Dane tear it all apart, he said, his eyes narrowing. You don't even love me, I said, my voice trembling. You haven't for years. Peter laughed bitterly. Maybe not, but that doesn't mean I'm going to let you humiliate me. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You have 2 choices, Isabel. End whatever this is with Dane and keep your place in this family, or lose everything. The next day, Georgia called me. Her voice was hesitant, almost guilty. I need to tell you something, she said quietly. What is it? I asked, my stomach twisting. It's about Peter, she began. He's been asking me questions about you and Dane, about whether I've noticed anything unusual. My blood ran cold. Why would he do that? Because he's suspicious, Georgia said. And because I told him things. I froze, the betrayal cutting through me like a knife. You what? I didn't mean to, Izzy, she said quickly. He caught me off guard, and I didn't know what to say. You sold me out, I said, my voice trembling with anger. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, her voice breaking. But Peter offered to help me with my debt, and I didn't know what else to do. Her confession left me reeling. Not only was Peter trying to control me, but now Georgia had become part of his plan. As I hung up the phone, a wave of determination washed over me. Peter thought he had the upper hand, but I wasn't going to let him destroy me or Dane without a fight. The house was silent that evening, but the tension was suffocating. Peter's ultimatum and George's betrayal had left me spinning, and for the first time, I wasn't sure how to move forward. Dane stayed in his room, quiet and withdrawn, but I knew he was waiting for me to decide what came next. By the time Peter returned home from his office, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the living room. I stood by the window, my arms crossed, trying to steady my breath. He walked in and paused, his gaze sharp as he looked at me. You've been thinking, he said. It wasn't a question. I have, I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. And I turned to face him, meeting his cold, calculating stare. You think you've won, I said quietly. You think you can control me, control us, by threatening to destroy everything. But you're wrong. His brow arched, but he said nothing, waiting for me to continue. You want to talk about humiliation? I said, stepping closer. How do you think the world would react if they found out about your little secret? About the other woman in the city? For the first time, Peter's composure slipped, his expression darkening. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. Oh, but I do, I replied, my tone sharper now. You've been unfaithful for years, haven't you? And you think I didn't notice? You think I didn't put the pieces together every time you extended your trips, or came home smelling like someone else's perfume? Peter's jaw tightened, and I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. So go ahead, I continued, my voice rising. Threaten me. Blackmail me. But know this, if you try to ruin me, I'll make sure you lose everything too. The silence between us was electric, the weight of my words settling over the room like a storm. Finally, Peter exhaled sharply, his hands clenched at his sides. You're playing a dangerous game, Isabel, he said. I learned from the best, I shot back. Before he could respond, Dane appeared in the doorway, his expression calm, but his eyes blazing with determination. Is everything okay? He asked, his voice steady. Peter turned to him, his lips curling into a bitter smile. Well, here's the golden boy now, he said. You've certainly made a mess of things, haven't you? Dane didn't flinch. If there's a mess, it's because of you, he replied, his tone even. You've neglected her for years, treated her like she's invisible. You don't get to play the victim now. Peter's face darkened, and for a moment, I thought he might lash out. But instead, he simply shook his head, laughing bitterly. You two deserve each other, he said finally, his voice dripping with contempt. As he walked out of the room, the weight in my chest lifted slightly. For the first time in years, I felt like I had reclaimed a piece of myself. But the fight wasn't over yet.